Americans don't like what they're seeing right now.
We do not have evidence that he was waving a gun, doing anything to threaten Border Patrol. He had his phone.
You know, we believe in federalism and state rights, and nobody likes feds coming into their state. And so what's the goal right now? Is it to deport every single non-U.S. citizen? I don't think that's what Americans want.
This situation's only going to get worse, and I really think that there are so many cities in the United States that have issues with criminal illegals that I think they would be better received in other cities. And I hope that's something they're talking about doing right now, because, you know, Minneapolis isn't the only city.
Everyone needs to de-escalate. Everyone needs to offer a little bit of diplomacy, because we cannot have this on repeat. It is politically disastrous for the president, and also not the kind of civil society we need to live in.
Right now, there's tempers are just going crazy, and we need to calm this down.
If you have a police department that's not accountable, or a law enforcement agency that's not accountable, that basically is the Gestapo. That is the secret police. That is the SS.
No, your ears are not deceiving you, actually. You did just hear fascist lawmakers, as well as some prominent regime propagandists, condemn the Gestapo's ongoing terrorism in Minneapolis. It was a tepid condemnation, but a condemnation nonetheless. And these said condemnations are occurring after the ICE Gestapo just executed another U.S. citizen in broad daylight. This time it was 37-year-old Alex Pretti. Now, as you all know, this is the second public execution that they've committed just in the last month, but bear in mind, they've also committed other executions that we didn't witness. 43-year-old Keith Porter Jr. was murdered by an off-duty ICE Nazi on New Year's Eve. 55-year-old Geraldo Lunas Campos was strangled to death at a concentration camp in Texas by a prison guard. And aside from these more high-profile murders, 5 other human beings have been killed at the hands of Trump's Gestapo. In addition to these 9 murders, they've also inflicted injuries on countless people, including the elderly and babies, like we're talking actual infants that are 6 months old, and they've been trampling on the Constitution by breaking down people's doors to hunt down immigrants and racially profiling people. So naturally, this tyranny has heightened tensions in the country to the point where there is a legitimate concern of a civil war occurring or a potential insurgency breaking out. And as much as fascists would love to see black and brown people tortured, some are seemingly starting to tone down the bravado now that they're realizing that the Gestapo has no qualms murdering people that look like them too, i.e. white people who legally own firearms. So after being uncomfortable with the world that they thought they wanted, some of them are now starting to tuck their tails between their legs, and they're calling for peace. For example, the editorial board of the right-wing New York Post is explicitly calling on Trump to de-escalate. Republican governors like Phil Scott of Virginia are calling for the pause of Operation Metro Surge in Minneapolis. You have GOP senators issuing statements pretending to care about Alex Pretti's execution. And even Trump's biggest dick riders like James Comer are now trying to desperately get President Neckpussy to understand that the situation in Minneapolis really is untenable. And as you're going to see, James Comer is going to try to get Trump to think that he's actually owning the libs by pulling ICE out of Minneapolis. Just watch this shit.
If I were President Trump, I would almost think about, okay, if the mayor and the governor are going to put our ICE officials in harm's way, and there's a chance of losing more, innocent lives or whatever, then maybe go to another city and let the people of Minneapolis decide, do we want to continue to have all of these illegals? Are we going to allow our governor, attorney general, and mayor to get away with this? And I think the people of Minnesota would rebel against their leadership.
That clip really signifies just how desperate they are. And let me see if I get this straight. So it's a win for Trump if you give the people of Minneapolis exactly what they've been demanding for weeks. They're going to rebel against Democratic leadership. Okay, let's go with that plan. Let's own the libs by giving protesters what they want. I like that idea. But let me just translate for you what he's saying. Mr. President, please make it all stop. I don't want to be viewed as a figurehead for your regime. If Civil War II or American Revolution Part 2 Electric Boogaloo kicks off, please, I'm too fragile for that sort of situation. But he's not alone, because leading candidates in the GOP primary for Minnesota's gubernatorial race, Chris Madel, for example, announced that he is ending his campaign since he does not want to be associated with any of the bullshit that's coming out of the Republican Party. Like, the tyranny to him is a bridge too far. And for whatever reason, he's chosen to draw the line right now.
Today, I announced the end of my campaign. I have 2 primary reasons for this decision. I cannot support the National Republican's stated retribution on the citizens of our state, nor can I count myself a member of a party that would do so. United States citizens, particularly those of color, live in fear. United States citizens are carrying papers to prove their citizenship. That's wrong. ICE has authorized its agents to raid homes using a civil warrant that need only be signed by a Border Patrol agent. That's unconstitutional and it's wrong. And I have read about and I have spoken to countless United States citizens who have been detained in Minnesota due to the color of their skin. At the end of the day, I have to look my daughters in the eye and tell them I believe I did what was right. And I am doing that today.
As shocking as it is to see that, please don't assume that this Republican grew a heart, because I can assure you that's not the case. In fact, he slobs on Trump's knob for minutes throughout this video, and he admits that he gave legal counsel to Jonathan Ross, the ICE terrorist who murdered Renee Good. So this is not a good person, even though he wants you to think that he's doing this because he's a good person. I think that the real reason why he's bowing out is because, like James Comer, he's also terrified. See, the Trump regime's over-the-top blatant disregard for the rule of law and U.S. Constitution is very clearly breeding resistance. The public will only let you subvert constitutional norms in a more covert, insidious way over time. They're not going to be able to digest explicit violations of their civil liberties. They're not going to just stand by and watch you execute people in broad daylight. More savvy Republicans have learned over the years that you never throw frogs in a pot of boiling water. You turn up the temperature slowly so that way they don't realize that you're fucking them over. See, it's also much easier to sell the disenfranchisement of people of color with dog whistles and subtle fear-mongering as opposed to Jim Crow-era racial profiling that we can all see. They're also breaking down people's doors, so, that's a little startling to people. So don't get it twisted. This guy supports everything that Trump is doing. He is a Republican, after all. He just would prefer that the Trump regime be a little bit less conspicuous and more subtle so as to not trigger the wrath of the masses. He's basically like a moderate Democrat for all intents and purposes. And there are signs that the Trump regime is actually getting that message too. I say this because even though the usual suspects like Stephen Miller, Greg Bovino, Kristi Noem, they all wasted no time smearing Alex Pretti by lying about his assassination in the same way that they lied about Renee Good's assassination, Trump is very clearly not so subtly starting to change his tune as well. In a brief interview with the Wall Street Journal, he signaled that he would withdraw his Gestapo from Minneapolis at some point in an attempt to obviously calm the fury that he sparked, and this may be the result of requests from the ICE Nazis themselves, because journalist Bill Melugin has sources from within the Gestapo that tell him that they actually feel really uneasy and frustrated with the rhetoric from the Trump regime, because they say that statements from DHS officials like Kristi Noem are hurting their image and damaging morale, and even though they definitely do support doing Nazi shit and want to do Nazi shit, they'd prefer less chest beating from the likes of Stephen Miller and whatnot, because it's really pissing off too many people and making their jobs a lot more difficult. They also don't like how ICE is being blamed for some of the actions of Border Patrol, and I actually do think that that's a really great point, because Border Patrol agents are in lockstep with ICE, and they're also modern day Nazis as well for all intents and purposes. So I do think that we need to recognize that they too need to be abolished, and every single Border Patrol agent should also be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law as well. So let's not forget about them. But to go back to the issue at hand, it seems like for the first time since their surge in Minneapolis, Trump is finally starting to crack. On Monday evening, we learned that Greg Bovino, commander of the SS Gestapo, had been removed from his position. But on top of that, Trump is also making nice with Democratic Party politicians. For example, he tweeted about a call that he had with Governor Tim Walz that went really well, apparently, and signaled his intent to work with Tim Walz. He also announced that he's sending Tom Homan, aka fascist Elmer Fudd, to Minnesota, which is being perceived as him benching Kristi Noem. And even though the regime spokesperson, Caroline Leibert, see what I did there, is denying that he's lost confidence in Kristi Noem and that this definitely isn't a sign of that, his own propaganda network thinks that this is the Trump regime's way of signaling to Minnesota that they want to turn down the temperature, since Homan is ostensibly a moderate compared to Kristi Noem. Just listen to what they say.
There's been a civil war within the administration between people like Tom Homan, who want to keep immigration an 80-20 issue and who want to go into these cities and take out the most hardened criminals, the child rapists, the murderers, the ones who are already in the system, who shouldn't be shielded by someone like Tim Walz, who's desperate to change the narrative.
People were promised.
And then you have people like Kristi Noem and Stephen Miller, who want to make this an 80-20 issue, and that they want to deport 80% of the people who are in this country illegally. That's a political win for people like Jacob Frey and Tim Walz, because they get to say, look at the Gestapo. You know, they're arresting 5-year-olds and gardeners.
He is sending Tom Homan to Minnesota today.
Good decision as well. And Tom Homan, based on the reporting, has been saying, guys, we should go after the worst of the worst. This is a problem. Also, I think that law enforcement, through their signals, are telling people like Bill Malugin, this is becoming a problem for us. Our safety is at risk because it's ginning people up by saying that we are doing things that we are not doing. Mm-hmm. Tom Homan has been saying, let's get in there, let me help. Mm-hmm. So by the president making that action today, as I said, he knows it's unsustainable. He's doing something different today. You know what I look for Tom Homan to do? I think he's going to meet with the mayor and governor. And I think he can come in. On first glance, you're like, well, he's just a Trump guy. Well, not really. He was just big on the border. And for Barack Obama to give him an award for what his incredible work he did with Jay Johnson, and I think he has bipartisan credibility. And also, I didn't see him for a week or two, you know he wasn't buying into what was happening. And there's been friction between the Kristi Noem people and Tom Homan for a while, but he will not go public, and nor do they want to be fighting in public. Well, that's the other thing, is that they're sniping behind the scenes, and the president is now saying, I am sending Tom Homan to Minneapolis. So everybody get in line.
So they're trying to communicate to the country that Trump is actually listening to the public. And, you know, it's not really him. It's one of his underlings. It's Kristi Noem. And by sidelining Kristi Noem and bringing in a more moderate voice, he's trying to cool tensions. He's listening. Isn't he democratic and definitely not a dictator? Now, I think that what he's doing is very clearly an attempt to placate people now that, you know, shit's getting more serious. But I can assure you that Tom Homan is not a fucking moderate. The new boss is identical to the old boss. Sure, Tom Homan might seem more bipartisan since it was actually President Obama who made him ICE's Executive Associate Director of Enforcement and Removal Operations. And actually, Obama even gave him a medal back in 2015 to reward him for all of the deportations that he did. But I can assure you this man is no moderate. Even under Obama, the year before he got the medal precisely, Tom Homan was pitching child separation, the very policy that Trump would go on to adopt in his first term. So he is as extreme as Kristi Noem. The difference between him and Tom Homan is that Democrats are a little bit more willing to collaborate with a fascist like him because he makes them a tiny bit more comfortable. But I mean, at the end of the day, this is a distinction without a difference. Tom Homan has spent the last year threatening to invade cities and arrest Democratic politicians who get in the way. So even though I do think that his deployment to Minnesota is a gesture from Trump to show something, it's effectively a meaningless gesture. And to be clear, Tim Walz has been showing his belly to Trump since the beginning of the Gestapo's occupation of his state, so I can't imagine that that pathetic coward of a governor said anything that was different this time. So the question is, what changed? Why is the Trump regime just suddenly trying to be more reasonable? Why are they trying to at least make you think that him and his cronies are backing down? And I think that there's a number of things that could explain this sudden shift. Maybe they were able to empathize with Alex Pretti a little bit more than they could with someone like Renee Good or Keith Porter, because Alex Pretti is a white man who appreciated the Second Amendment much like them. That's possible, but I think that's probably unlikely since, you know, the Trump regime and Republicans in general, they don't ever change their minds about anything policy related unless it affects them personally. So that's probably not what's at play here. Another possibility is that oligarchs close to Trump are trying to get him to tone it down because people sheltering in place to avoid ICE terrorism might actually be hurting their businesses, not just in Minneapolis, but across the country where you see really heavy ICE presence. On top of that, I would imagine that oligarchs would prefer to not see so much political instability and chaos in the streets and mass mobilization whenever they leave their mansions, because again, they have all the money in the world, but like, what's the point if you live in a country that's going to shit? You know, maybe that's a factor, but I have a theory, a main theory, and I wanna just let this marinate a little bit. I actually think that this is a sign that Trump is scared shitless. And I think that's the case because when European leaders finally stood up to him in unison over his threats to annex Greenland, guess what he did? He backed off, at least for now. And when Americans took to the streets in his first term, after he implemented Homan's child separation policy, guess what he did? He backed down then too. And now that Minneapolis is rising up in huge numbers, and he's noticing, guess what he's doing? He's starting to back down. And even though they're literally murdering people in the streets of Minneapolis, the people aren't deterred one bit. If anything, more people are getting politically mobilized now than ever before, proving that they're not going to be intimidated by these Nazi thugs. But I don't think that public pressure alone is the only factor here. I think that it's the kind of public pressure that Trump is more fearful about. The day before Alex Pretti's assassination, more than 75,000 Minnesotans took to the streets in sub-zero weather, and they shut Minneapolis down, demanding that the ICE Gestapo leave their city immediately. And the organizers claimed that hundreds of thousands of people across the state participated in their statewide general strike, with over 700 businesses across the state closing down. And if you're wondering whether or not the powers that be got the message, yeah, I think that they did, because as ABC News reports, 60 different CEOs of Minnesota-based companies, some of which supported Trump, mind you, issued a statement calling for de-escalation. We're talking about the big dogs here: Best Buy, Target, United Health, Blue Cross Blue Shield, US Bancorp, 3M, you name it. All of them signed onto this open statement calling for calm in a time of tumultuous politics. But the statement itself is typical corpo speak bullshit. They don't even name Alex Pretti and cowardly refer to his assassination as yesterday's tragic news. But this is their way of telling all of us, oh my God, please, 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 please don't do what you did on January 23rd. Please don't do a prolonged nationwide general strike. We hear you, because we saw what you did and we felt that shit. At least that's how I interpreted this statement. Maybe that's wishful thinking. Perhaps Pretti's murder really was the straw that broke the camel's back for them, but it's just a little hard to believe that ICE's 9th murder is what prompted them to finally say something. I think that the more likely explanation is that they realize Americans are really starting to connect the dots here and see that a general strike could fuck up a lot of things for them. People are finally starting to communicate to Trump and the oligarchs in a language that they understand, which is money. And Trump is probably too stupid to understand this, but I'm sure that one of his cronies told him that Americans could bring him and every other oligarch to their knees if Americans do what they did in Minneapolis, but across the country. And it's not just Trump who sees this. Democrats see it too, as evidenced by the fact that Senate Democrats all of a sudden are signaling their intent to fight back and even shut down the government again if necessary in order to get some accountability measures for ICE in their upcoming appropriations bill, including an end to roving ICE patrols, arrest quotas, and face masks, as well as a requirement for actual warrants before trespassing and an independent investigation into the murders that they've committed in Minneapolis and across the country. In other words, they know too. Democrats, as well as Republicans and Trump, all know how powerful a general strike would be. But look, maybe it is the case that Alex Pretti's murder really was the final straw. That video was horrific. That's possible. But let's not pretend like they don't see Americans openly talking about a general strike, especially after how successful it was in Minneapolis. And I think that a lot of them see that, and they're genuinely shaken by this, because that is a real threat to power. They know that Americans are going to tolerate only so much shit before shit hits the fan, before they bust out the pitchforks, or they hit them where it really hurts. And in order to prevent people from doing a real general strike across the country, they're trying to change things up. Even Democrats are promising to finally fight. Sure, I'm sure that's going to happen. But like, it just goes to show you how powerful the threat is. Now, again, it is entirely possible that the last month has taken me to such a dark place, mentally speaking, that my brain is putting me in like copium overdrive and sending me natural hopium-inducing chemicals as a survival mechanism because I can't take any more dread. But I really do feel like that's not the case, and that this isn't a mirage, and that it actually does seem like the cracks are starting to form. And if that's the case, then the lesson, obviously, for today's video is that we very much still do have leverage. And regardless of the regime's feigned acquiescence and political theater to try to placate us, that doesn't change the fact that they really have pushed us too fucking far this time. There's no easing tensions at this point. They've pushed us past our breaking points, and they're only slamming on the brakes now that they're starting to see us fight back. So I say, fuck them. We should go ahead with the national general strike. We should grind this entire bitch to a halt. Bring every corporate collaborator and puppet politician to their motherfucking knees until we get everything that we want. No more fascism, Trump's resignation, the abolition of ICE, Medicare for all, everything that we want. Because politicians, they're not going to willingly give us what we want. I think we've learned that by this point. We have to take what we want. And the way that we take what we want is by exercising our economic leverage with a general strike across the country. And if their fears already detectable with just a one-day strike in a single state, imagine how scared they'll be if we do this across the country for a day or a week or a month. By the end of it, they'd be fucking begging us to stop. So the smell of fear in the air is further validation that this is the way to go. A general strike is the answer.
When you acting like a